Hello and welcome to another video from our AGS Inspire Leadership Development Program. The focus this week is on holding people to account. Now, like with all our videos, this is a flipped learning video, which means that this is the pre-session video that you need to watch prior to attending the face-to-face session. It's really, really important you watch this to get the most out of the session itself. And the best way to do that is to feel free to pause it, rewind it, take notes, watch it again, and reflect on it either with yourself or with some of your colleagues in school. Okay, let's dive into this week's content then, about holding people to account. And I think that as leaders, we do more of this than we've ever done before. And I think that certainly in the last 20 years, one of the rapid increases we've seen in school improvement has been down to high levels of accountability than we've ever seen before. Now, some people, and sometimes we say that that's gone too far, but I think that if we kind of weighed up and we look at schools 20, 30, 40 years ago, there was a sense that if students didn't want to learn, if they weren't that bothered, well, that was their lookout. I think that that's significantly changed in our schools now, and there's huge accountability in terms of the level of standards that we can actually provide for our students, because ultimately we are held accountable for the use of public money. I think that's a really, really important takeaway message to think about from this whole video, that we're using public money, and it's really, really important to make sure that we give best value to the students in our care and to their families. And I think anyone who's a parent watching this as well, I'll talk about this later on in the video, but if you always think about, would it be good enough for my own children, then I think that starts to really hit home, and you can really start to think about, the levels of accountability that you need to actually achieve yourself, but also for the other people under your care. Right, a few different sections I want to talk about, and really a lot of this is reflection leading up to the face-to-face session itself. And the first one is, how do we then build a culture in our schools where we don't have to get to difficult conversations with the people we line manage, to make sure we hold them to account for their actions, for their responsibilities, and for the levels of performance that they're giving us now, our students. And a great book I've read recently is this great High Challenge, Low Threat by Mary Wyatt, and it's really, really good, and it really talks about how we can then build that culture in our schools, because it's not about really, really high threat that actually if you don't achieve these targets, then you're going to lose your job. It's about how we can then put those systems of support in place, and how we can support people to achieve the very, very best that they can. And as leaders, we need to make sure we do that. Lots of things about how do we get buy-in. And if you think about it from your own point of view, if you are a middle leader or a senior leader, or you're aspiring to be one of those, how do you get buy-in from the staff to make sure that you don't have to get to that stage where you're having a difficult conversation about something that hasn't been done, or that a member of staff hasn't wanted to do? How do you build that culture where people actually understand their roles, their responsibilities, the bigger picture, the vision, the why that we've talked about in previous sessions? How do you build that? And there are lots of chapters in the book there. They really explore that and talk about that a lot further, in more detail than we're going to in this video. But one of the key things as well I want to stress is that sometimes one of the common pitfalls that leaders make is that they don't really understand the difference between responsibility and accountability. And that's really interesting, because I think we all have a responsibility for the raising of standards. We all have a collective responsibility for increasing the student outcomes in our classrooms and our schools. But actually, the accountability side is, which part of that are you solely accountable for? So there may be a plan as a leader that you have put in place, and that your team shares that responsibility. And the key word there is sharing, because it's a shared responsibility that we all undertake. But actually, individual people will be accountable for certain areas of that, and making sure those things are done. And that's really key when you're moving forward. And I think that clarified it for me when I kind of first read that a while ago, in terms of that real clarity about, well, what does holding people to account actually mean? And can you hold a whole team to account for just their responsibility? It's very, very difficult to do that. That there's easy kind of ways for people to have kind of slippy shoulders and thinking about, well, it wasn't really me, it was a few of us. Let's individualize roles, tasks, and things down to one person, so actually we can then hold them to account for that. And when you start thinking about that, it becomes far more easier to work out a plan of action and how you're going to deliver on those targets. Okay, two kind of sections I want to explore now in terms of holding people to account. The first is holding people to account who have a management or a TLR responsibility, and we're going to look at this in the face-to-face session itself. And that is really making sure that they are held account for their area of that development plan, and there are agreed targets. You've talked about things, and it's very, very clear what they are looking to do, and they are paid a TLR responsibility. They have maybe a leadership responsibility for something, and actually that again that's public money, extra money that they are receiving to carry out a certain task, to hit a certain target. I think anyone in a kind of leadership management responsibility area who have people working underneath them, who you are line managing, we need to make sure that is really key, because as leaders we do more of that now than we do teaching, and that's really interesting. Something we've kind of explored before about the fact that how much training do we get on teaching and pedagogy, yet how much training do we get on leadership? But as leaders we do more leading than teaching. So it's really, really important to really focus on that and think about, if you can get everyone under your leadership to do everything that they need to do, to work really, really well, to be very effective, to be very efficient, then actually everything else will take care of itself. If you're not able to do that as a leader, then actually that's all going to come back to you, because you are overall responsible for all those areas. And the second area in that as well is also holding people to account for their own classroom performance. And I'm a big believer that really one of the biggest areas of school improvement is leadership, but it's the quality of teaching and learning, and it's the leadership of teaching and learning. We shouldn't be looking to be a sticky plaster school or a sticky plaster organisation, because there's no real sustainability in that, and we burn out very quickly. But actually, how can you make sure that you eliminate internal variances? So actually, if you are a leader of a faculty or a year group, or even the whole school, when you look left and right down your corridors, do you see the same standard? And actually, is that fair? And I've talked about this analogy before, where if you and I went out to a restaurant tonight, and we both ordered steak, and my steak was far bigger, far juicier, far better cooked than your steak, and we paid the same price, you wouldn't be very happy. And ultimately, that's exactly the same as a school. If you think about the families that you that you serve, really, and actually just by a timetabling issue, they may get a raw deal or a better deal from the staff that you employ in your school, or that you lead in your department. And actually, how can you start to eliminate those areas of internal variance? How can you start to hold staff to account for the performance that they are delivering hour in, hour out, day in, day out, week in, week out, year in, year out in your schools? And the big thing for me here, and we talked about this right at the start of the video, is would you be happy with the standard that is under your care and under your leadership for your own children? And I think when you start to think about it like that, it really hits home that actually, if you wouldn't be happy with the standard of that for your own children, then actually you do need to look yourself in the mirror and think, well, this is under my watch, this is under my leadership, this is next to my name, so therefore I am compliant to those standards or those lack of standards. And if you wouldn't be happy standing on a national stage showing those standards, or writing an article in the TES or in your local paper about those standards, then ultimately you have to do something about it. If you don't do something about it, then you are compliant to that lack of standards, that poor education, and in my mind that then just results in weak leadership, which is a lot of times why schools are not performing as high as they can, because of that lack of strong leadership and the ability to make tough decisions and to hold people to account. But again, thinking about how do we get there without the difficult conversation? How do we, what do we do proactively? How do we build that culture around the school, that people understand what they're doing, they want to do it, they buy into it, and we don't have to get to that stage of a difficult conversation. And lastly then, to reflect on, I've given you quite a lot to reflect on there, but actually reflecting on how accountable are you as a member of staff in your school? So if you're a TLR holder, if you're a member of the leadership team, how accountable are you? What are you accountable for? And secondly, if you are a leader and you have people underneath you, well, actually, how accountable are the people underneath you from your leadership? Do you hold them to account for their TLR? Or is it just a cosy chat in the office every now and again? So how accountable are you? How accountable are people underneath you in your leadership? Lots to think about there, lots to reflect on. And again, like we say in all the videos, please make sure you take this into account in terms of your own leadership, your own context, your own school, what it means to you. Not just the fact that there's some theory thrown in there, but actually what does it mean to you, and how can you start to improve your own leadership, or how can you grow into a more experienced, more effective, more efficient leader because of the things we've talked about. So I'm looking forward to the face-to-face session. It'll be very practical again, and I look forward to seeing you there this week. Thank you.